So before presenting our speakers, I want to share a quick overview of today's event and theme. First, about today. Today's event marks Human Rights Day. Each 10th of December, all around the world, we commemorate the adoption of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Yet more than 70 years later, we know that those rights are still violated all around the world. But we also know that all around the world, courageous men and women are fighting for those rights. And about this event's theme, today we will hear about the struggle to protect human rights and our common home in the context of extractivism, business activities, and the COVID-19 pandemic in Latin America. Thanks to you and to your support, CAFOD is privileged to work with human rights defenders who help to keep governments and businesses in check, to put people ahead of profits and protect our planet. Yet, in return for their work, they face criminalisation, harassment, and violence. CAFOD's recent report, Protecting Our Common Home, Land and Human Rights Defenders in Latin America, found that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated deep inequalities and led to increased attacks on human rights defenders and their communities. In 2020, 264 human rights defenders were killed. 40% of them were land, environmental, or indigenous defenders. Latin America is also the region with the highest number of attacks against defenders working on business-related human rights issues. Action is urgently needed to protect these extraordinary people defending human rights and the environment, and to end abuses in the supply chain of multinational companies. Tonight's event will last 2 hours. We will hear first-hand testimonies from indigenous and environmental defenders in Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, who are facing violence and risking their lives to protect their rights and the vital resources for their communities, such as land and water. This will be followed with a question and answer session with the defenders. And following this, you will hear what concrete actions we can take from here in the UK to stand in solidarity to support defenders, including protecting them from the activities of international businesses. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions to CAFOD policy and campaigns experts, so we really hope that you'll be able to stay with us until the end. So, without further ado, I'd like to open our event with a short message sent to us from Cardinal Pedro Barreto, who is the Archbishop of Huancayo in Peru. He's the Vice President of the Peruvian Bishops' Conference, and chiefly he's also the President of REPAM, which is the Pan-Amazon Ecclesial Network of the Church across the region of Latin America.
Un saludo muy cordial a todos ustedes desde Huancayo en el Perú.
Very warm greetings to all of you from Huancayo in Peru. I am Cardinal Pedro Barreto, Archbishop of Huancayo. Today we have gathered together to celebrate another anniversary, the 10th of December 1948, human rights.
Los derechos humanos.
Human rights were declared. The Catholic Agency for International Development, CAFOD,
es la expresión de una
is the expression of a church in England and in Wales that is committed to serving humanity. Therefore, today I would like very briefly to talk to you
de los derechos
humanos, the ways that this understanding of human rights and the way we understand human rights
fundamentalmente
We
en
believe that
estos
human
derechos de toda
society is
persona humana.
fundamentally
Y
rooted
toda
on the
persona
support
tiene
provided by human
derechos
rights defenders.
inalienables que
Everybody
debemos
has
cuidar:
inalienable
la
rights
vida, el entorno
to
natural
life,
y los demás
natural
derechos que
environment,
están
and other
conectados
rights
con el ser
that are
humano, con la
associated with
persona
their
humana.
character
Y por
as human
tanto
beings,
tenemos que
and
ser muy
therefore
conscientes que la
must be
doctrina social de la
protected.
Iglesia
We must therefore
ilumina
be
este
very aware,
acontecimiento
very conscious
fundamental.
of the
Por
Church's
eso,
social
la
teaching,
Laudato
which
Si, la
highlights
encíclica
this
social del Papa
fundamental truth.
Francisco,
And that is
nos
why
hace tomar
Laudato
conciencia
Si,
de lo que
Pope Francis's
significa
social
la vida de
encyclical,
las personas
ensures that
y
we
la casa
understand what
común.
people's life
Y
and
ahí
the common home
advierte el Papa
mean.
Francisco con mucha
In the
claridad
encyclical,
que
Pope
todos
Francis
tenemos que cuidar
expresses
y
very clearly
proteger
that we must
la
all care
vida
for and
y la
protect
casa común.
life
La
and
tierra
our common
donde
home.
vivimos
That is, the land
es
where
un
we live
derecho
is a
colectivo.
collective right.
No podemos
We
nosotros
can't
dilapidar los recursos
squander
naturales
natural
de
resources
manera, yo diría,
in what I would
irracional,
say is an
como los
irrational
está
way,
viviendo
as we
hoy en
are
el mundo.
today
Un ejemplo
around the
muy
world.
claro es la
A
deforestación,
very clear
especialmente
example of
de
this
los
is
bosques. En
deforestation,
la
especially
Amazonía, de
of the
manera muy especial,
rainforests.
ya
In the
en
Amazon
plena
in
pandemia ha
particular, and in
aumentado
the
la
context of
deforestación,
the
y
pandemic,
esto significa de verdad
deforestation,
que
logging has
todos nosotros
increased.
tenemos que ser
And this means that we
responsables,
all have to be
especialmente los
responsible,
estados y las
especially the
empresas de
states
las
and
industrias
the
extractivas,
extractive
para
industries,
cuidar
the
la
companies
vida y
that have
cuidar el
formed the
entorno
extractive industry
natural.
in order to care for
¿Quiénes
life
son
and the
los
environment.
defensores del medio ambiente?
Who are human
¿Quiénes
rights,
son los
environmental
defensores
defenders?
de los derechos
Who are
humanos?
human
Es
rights
todas las
defenders?
personas y
They are
también
everyone,
instituciones que,
including
como parte de sus
organizations who,
principios
as
y
a part
valores
of the
fundamentales,
fundamental principles
quieren
that they live by
cuidar este
and their
don de
values,
Dios
want
que
to
es
look
la vida
after this
humana
gift
y
from God,
también el
which is
entorno
human life
natural.
and our
Ese
natural
entorno
environment.
natural que es nuestra
That
casa
natural
común.
environment
Y
that is
tenemos que
our common home.
preguntarnos
And
de
we really
verdad,
must ask
como lo hace el
ourselves,
Papa
as Pope
Francisco
Francis
en la
does in
encíclica
his encyclical
Laudato
Laudato
Si,
Si,
¿cuál sería
exactly
el
what
mundo que
kind of world do
queremos
we want
dejar
to
para las
leave
generaciones
for
actuales,
future
para los niños
generations
que
to
están
inherit,
creciendo
for
y
the
para los
children who are
niños que
growing
vendrán?
now, and for growing
¿Por
up
qué
now, and for the
hemos
children who are
venido
yet
a
to be
esta
born?
tierra? ¿Para
Why
qué
are we on this
Dios
earth?
nos ha dado la vida?
Why has God
Por
given us
tanto,
life?
tenemos que ser
We must
conscientes que el
therefore
cuidado
know
de
that
la vida
caring
y
for
el
life
entorno
and for the
natural
natural
es
environment
parte
is an
esencial de
essential
nuestra
part
misión
of our
evangelizadora
evangelizing
como
mission
Iglesia
as
Católica.
the Catholic
Pero aún
Church.
más,
But
con mucho
what's
dolor,
more,
tenemos que
and I
reconocer
must say it is
que
very
cada
painful
2
to do so,
días
we
en
must
el año
recognize that every
2020,
2
el año
days
pasado,
in 2020, last
un
year,
líder ambiental
an
amazónico
environmental leader
perdía la vida.
working in the Amazon
Esto nos
was
hace
killed.
pensar que
This
hay unas
makes us
fuerzas,
think
yo diría,
obliges us to
destructivas de la vida y
think of
del
the
entorno
forces that I would
natural
say are
que no
destroying
tienen
life,
otro camino
factors
que
that destroy
destruir
life
la
and the
vida de esos
environment,
hermanos y hermanas que
whose
con gran
only way of
valentía
operating, these
han
actors,
liderado
is to
también
destroy the
el
lives
derecho que
of our
todos
brothers
tenemos
and
a
sisters
una vida
who,
digna,
with great
saludable y
courage, have
también a
always
una
championed the right that
vida
we all
en
have
nuestra
to a
casa
dignified,
común
healthy,
digna
and
y que
dignified
tenemos que
life
cuidar.
in our common
Mi
home, the
propia
common home that
experiencia
we must
en este
protect.
campo me
My own
hace pensar
experience
y
in
sentir
this field
la
makes
urgencia
me
hoy de
aware of the
escuchar también
urgency
el
of
grito de la
listening
tierra,
to the cry of
esa
the
alerta
earth,
roja que nos han
this
dado
red
en
alert
los organismos
that
internacionales
international
frente a las
organizations
consecuencias
have
del cambio
advanced about
climático,
the
nos
consequences of
aseguran
climate
que de
change.
verdad tenemos mucho camino que
This
recorrer.
makes it
La
clear to us that
esperanza
we have a
de que
long way
todos
to go.
unidos
My
salgamos
hope is that
adelante
all of
no
us,
solamente de
united,
la pandemia
can
sanitaria,
overcome
sino
not
de otras
only the
pandemias
pandemic,
sociales
the health
que
crisis,
afectan
but
los
also the
derechos
social
humanos.
pandemics that affect
Cristo
human
es
rights.
nuestra fuente
Christ
de
is
esperanza y
our
de alegría.
source of hope and joy.
We're so grateful to Cardinal Pedro for having made that time for us. He was just off a plane from Mexico and sent us that special message. So now let's introduce our speakers, our first speakers for this evening. And our first speakers are from Cusco in Peru. Ariana Kana Magaño is an environmental defender from the Huisa community. The Huisa community in Espinar, which is part of the national platform of people affected by heavy metals. Her community has been denouncing the impacts of environmental pollution generated by mining in their territory, including on human health, and that so far has not been properly addressed by either the Peruvian state or the mining company Glencore. And then Karen Luque is an environmental and health specialist at CAFOD's partner, DHSF, that's Human Rights Without Borders. Karen will talk about the social, health and environmental aspects and impacts of mining, the criminalisation of social leaders, and their struggle to access healthcare for those affected by heavy metals in Espinar in Cusco. If you have questions, please share your questions in the chat or at the end. So over to you, Karen and Ariana.
Buenas
Hello.
tardes. Bueno, en Perú.
Good evening. Here in Peru, it's just after 1:30 in the afternoon, so it's great to hear you. I'm Karim, as I've been introduced. I've been working for the last 5 years in Espinar province, a province that has been living together with mining for over 40 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about the situation. First, I'll give you an explanation, and then my comrade Ariana is going to give more information. Next. Karen, can you put your video on? It would be great to see your face. Sorry. Okay, yeah, I'm on it now. Hello, can you see me now? Okay. So here on this first photo in the left, you'll have all heard of Machu Picchu, I'm sure. Machu Picchu is a wonderful, it's a marvel of the world, and known throughout the world as something that every tourist wants to visit. Machu Picchu is a huge marvel that we have in the region of Cusco. Cusco is a very historic region. So we've got lots of different peasant communities who live throughout these territories. But yeah, on this one side, we have this very highly valued marvel. On the right, you can see what is happening to Espinar now in various parts of the territory. You've got these lorries that move 24 hours a day, and there's about 600 lorries that are just going around moving all of this mining extraction, and so they're extracting copper. And so in Cusco, it is just 5 hours from the area of Machu Picchu. We've got this area that has a huge expanse of mining exploration by the Glencore company. And this is called the Antapacay mining operations. And so they've been exploiting there for over 40 years. They've gone for, it was at BHP Billington, and then it went to Antaya, and now with a sort of parent company is Glencore, to get an idea about where we are talking about, what exactly is going on, and where exactly Espinar is located in Peru. Next slide, please.
Siguiente, por favor.
Yep. Next again. Oh, so, oops. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so what I was stressing, in our country, in Peru, in the Cusco region,
Al interno de todo esto está ubicado Espinar, una provincia.
And you've got Espinar within this territory. And so we've seen a lot of impacts of the mining activity over the course of the years. So it's degraded the environment, as you can see in these open cast mines in the first images in Tentaya. The particles that are all spread everywhere when the lorries pass, which contaminate the air and the soil. And all of the dam tailings. And so that's where they leave all of the water that's contaminated with all of the heavy metals when they're done with the extracted. And also our human rights are sort of ignored by the police when they're violated. Next, please.
Bueno, ahí también van a ver algunos impactos.
So here you can see some of the impacts on the communities living here. So animals are dying. You get filtrations. So you can see that there are leaks in some of the extraction operations, and we lose our water sources because they're using a lot of water in the mining activities, and so we lose all of our water. Next, please.
Para darle paso ahora
Okay,
a mi
now
compañera Ariana.
I'm going to pass over to Ariana. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I know that we don't have very much time, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about one of the testimonies. So, like my mother, there are many others, many men and women who are dying because of the mining activities. So I want to tell you about the pain that we're really living through in these communities. So they've been told that mining would bring economic development and growth. But in our indigenous communities, we're just losing everything. We've only seen losses. They've taken our identity from us. They've taken our culture from us. They've taken our tradition for growing crops such as quinoa and caninua. And so you can see these photos, and we've got my dear, dear mother. She's 70 years old. She's one of the founders of the Huisa communities. And so here, then the Huisa community is where the Antapacay operations are currently operate. So we can see my mother with the quinoa plants there. And yeah, in the community, then we really will live hand in hand with the environment. And the Antapacay operations, when they came in, they promised lots of things to the community, loads of positive things to the community. But after 13 years, what I've got now is I've got a mother and dad and brother all ill and infected by heavy metals. They are dying hour by hour. I know they have heavy metals infecting their blood. In my country is very corrupt. Justice is a business. They charge you to demand justice. In all of the media, they don't show the reality of what's going on. This doesn't come out in the television. They just show how Antapacay is the millionaire, and so that they only show their side, and they don't represent what is happening to the communities. And it's a complete violation of our human rights. A violation of a healthy environment, violating our right to life. My family continues to grow cereals, our traditional cereals, and having livestock and sheep. In the next photo that you'll see, you will see the contamination, all of this pollution. It's not only environmental impacts, but the social impacts that you see. On the right, you can see a young cow that is dying. So the cows and calves need water, but these water have been proven to be contaminated with heavy metals. They're very acidic waters, and the smaller animals suffer the worst of the consequences, as the elder ones do as well. So it's killing our animals, it's killing our people. And on the other side, they pay people to destroy the environment. And so, yeah, we try to get together to defend it, but we don't have anything left. The only thing that we have is faith in God. My parents pray every day to find a way to get them to stop violating human rights in this way. and to do something for the communities that are there. All we're asking for is support, because this is a situation, it's a critical moment now. We can't talk about mining and development. We can just talk about mining and destruction, because that's all it is. So that's all I can say right now. So thank you so much for your support, for listening. We really hope that you can help us. We believe that there really are good people in this world, and that something positive can come out and be and way more than the negative. Thank you so much.
And for this amazing testimony. Please, anybody who has questions, don't forget to put them into the chat, or you can put them in at the end. So to go on to our, oh, I'm so sorry, Karen still has to say a few words.
Solo yo quería, sí, unas tres cositas
Yes,
más.
I just wanted to say a few more things. So we've got these images here. What Ariana was talking about is one of the most serious consequences that we have. So we have undertaken various analyses. 150 people, of whom 78% had high levels of metals in their bodies and blood. So things like arsenic, cadmium, mercury, manganese, and lead. And these all create lots of problems in people's health, and such as cancer. So this has been seen as a public health problem, and we're trying to guarantee that these people receive the help and the support that they need, because really they are being poisoned by the mining activities. They're getting brain damage, they're nauseous, they're congenital problems, and these people are just being condemned to suffer in a way that we didn't expect. But so please, next slide, please. So when people protest and demand and just ask for the company to respect people's human rights, we are just faced with violence. The ex-mayor demanded a safe environment is currently being taken to court. That's been going on for the last 8 years, just for demanding his rights be respected and that the environment be respected. And also for demanding that the right to protest be respected. This is the sort of thing that's happening in the country. And so we need to find some ways to pressure the government to stop restricting our rights in this way. We're also asking for you in your countries to ask our country, Peru, to start to protect these territories. The only thing that these people have done wrong is to demand that their health and their environment be respected and their rights be respected. So please pressure your governments to pressure our government to defend our rights. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. And again, thank you, Ariana, for that very emotional testimony. So our next speaker is Robinson Mejia Alonso from Tolima in Colombia. Robinson is a human rights and environmental defender and a forestry engineer. He is a member of the Environmental and Farming Committee of Cajamarca and Anaime, and also the Socio-Environmental Youth Collective of Cajamarca. And he's going to share the experience of Cajamarca with the La Colosa gold mine, which is owned by Anglo Gold Ashanti. And again, if you have questions, please don't forget to put them into the chat. So, Robinson, over to you.
Buenas noches.
Good night, good evening in the United Kingdom, and good afternoon here in Latin America. For us, it's a pleasure to be able to take part in this event. We understand that life is something that we protect between all of us, and that joining together like this, even though we are divided by the Atlantic Ocean, is a beautiful opportunity for us. Cajamarca is a town in the center of Colombia, in the department of Tolima. It's a territory that historically has been disputed. From the 1600s, this territory had the fortune that the Spanish colonists managed to liquidate the indigenous population of Tolima before the end of the 16th century. Tolima we call an unconquerable territory because despite the fact that it has always been in dispute, that it has nevertheless always had men and women who are prepared to defend it. In the past, these were indigenous people, and now it is peasant communities who are struggling to defend their territory. Next slide, please. Cajamarca is recognized as the breadbasket of the center of the country. That means a rich land. It is full of rich lands for food production. Today, Cajamarca is recognized as the major producer of aracacho, which is a tropical root vegetable in the world. It's like a yam. So therefore, it's an important contributor to food security in the country. It is also second in terms of production of beans. And at some time or recently in Cajamarca, or at some point in Cajamarca, produced 40% of all of the cabbage produced in the country, 8% of the passion fruit, 5% of tomatoes. So these are just some figures. All they do is come together to demonstrate that Cajamarca is a very rich agricultural area, but not only rich in the subsoil, but also in its soils that allow it or enable it to be recognized as the breadbasket at the center of the country. Next slide, please. So in this context, in this rich territory that I have described, faced with the challenges of the climate crisis and the world crisis, in 2007, a Colombian president announced to the country that they had found a mine that could be one of the greatest mines in the whole world. This is the Colossa mining project that nowadays, according to the information that the South African company Anglo Gold Ashanti have published, is the third largest gold extractor at world level in the world. They had found a gold reserves that it is calculated is equivalent to 28,000 grams of gold. This makes it the largest gold mine in the country and threatens not only the culture of the peasant population in terms of their ability to produce food, but also threatens such important ecosystems as the paramos, which are the high moorlands that are the water preservers of the Andes, and the snow peaks. The mine goes into or has infiltrated paramo and protected snowland territories, and therefore the communities of Cajamarca and Tolima have rejected the plans for gold mining because it flies in the face of the interests of the points of view of the indigenous population, and also because of the terrible damage that it will cause to the paramos and to the cloud forests, the high cloud forests in the region. Next slide, please. Cajamarca has been involved in an interesting process. Given that what we are defending is life, we have tried to find creative and innovative ways to advance our story using carnival and happiness, seeking to, and our joyfulness to defend life. This is something which has emerged out of our spirit of of combativeness. This Jeep demonstrates the richness of the area, but also our creativity. It symbolizes our interest in returning to the mountains, that these are all the things, color, food, joyfulness, but above all, resistance that we are putting in place in order to oppose the mining. We are a people that is prepared to sacrifice ourselves in order to ensure that the region is able to continue to produce food. This is a photograph of the carnival in Cajamarca, because for us, it's very important that all of us, men and women, male and female, everybody are active, working together to defend life, because the mining activities will affect our rights. Indeed, our rights have been affected by the mining activities. And the best way, we think, to demonstrate who we are is through actions like this. This photograph shows that we are a people that will never give up its peasant roots and that will continue defending ourselves from mining activity. Next slide, please. That's why we have used the law and social mobilization in order to develop a process of community consultation that is called popular consultation. So in 2016, we as a group of citizens gathered together to ask ourselves to vote on whether we wanted Cajamarca to be an area where it would be possible to develop mining activities. And the response of the residents of Cajamarca was very, very powerful. 97% of those who voted said no, rejected mining activity and mining projects in Cajamarca. This mandate is a consensual position that we have constructed. And here we have a photo of how in the midst of the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown, the Council of Cajamarca produced this mandala in the main square in Cajamarca, so that the few people who were able to leave our homes during the quarantine, during lockdown, were able to see that even though we were in lockdown, we were able to continue celebrating life. It's a mandala that is full of colors and that is made up of the products that our lands produce. Food here, and also that the land produces men and women who are prepared, who are willing to defend the breadbasket at the center of the country. We have been attacked in the courts by the company. 5 legal cases have been brought against us by the company, which have been seeking to undermine the consensus that is in opposition to the mining company. We think, like the comrades from Peru think, we don't want to reach the stage that our Peruvian comrades have reached. We're still fighting to make sure that that doesn't happen. We're aware that communities that suffer from mining activities suffer a systematic violation of their human rights and their environmental rights. We are determined that we will continue to fight so that Cajamarca is respected, so that our culture is respected, and that we will be successful in defending our rights. So we're asking the world to help us in our struggle. It should not be allowed that a company rides roughshod over so many things when all that it is doing is impoverishing the local population and making it impossible for them for us to develop, making it impossible for the people to continue developing in the wake of the history that so many centuries have been dedicated to developing. I want to finish by saying that Cajamarca is an example of hope, and that we hope to continue nourishing our hope despite all of the threats that we are subjected to because of the struggle that we're engaged in. Thank you very much.
And it's great to hear stories of hope and examples of where the local communities are really resisting. So now we go on to our final speaker from the defenders. From Brazil, we're going to hear from Mauricio Yequana, who is an indigenous leader. He's an activist and the director of CAFOD's partner, Utukara Yanomami Association. Mauricio is from the Yanomami indigenous territory, where he supports his people to defend their rights and protect the Amazon rainforest, despite huge threats from illegal gold mining. Mauricio, unfortunately, is unable to speak to us live, but he recorded his messages for us when he came over to go to Scotland in November for the COP. For his own safety, he's now returned to his village in the Yanomami territory, but there's no reliable internet signal there. So he's left this recording for us. And so if there are going to be questions for what Mauricio is going to say, our country rep for Brazil, Cisa Iorio, is with us today to answer any questions you may have. So please share them in the chat so that we can take them up at the end. So over to Mauricio Yacuana.
My name is Mauricio Yacuana, Director of the Hutucara Yanomami Association. I work defending the Yanomami and Yacuana peoples of Brazil from Roraima State. The current situation of the Yanomami indigenous territory is one that is worsening all the time with regard to the illegal invasion of gold miners. The number of invaders is increasing all the time. This causes a great deal of conflict between communities, as well as lots of problems within communities. We've also received a lot of information recently about the issue of violence and the assassination of 2 young Yanomami people in the mining region. We've also suffered the deaths of 2 children who were sucked up by the dredging machinery operated by the miners. And we've just received information that miners killed indigenous people living in isolation within the Yanomami territory. There were 2 people who died, brutally killed by the miners in the Yanomami indigenous territory. The Hutucara Yanomami Association works receiving information, receiving concrete reports from the community, and we prepare documents to report these facts.
We send them to the Federal Police, to FUNAI, the Indigenous Affairs Agency, and also the Federal Public Prosecutor. We also sometimes share them nationally, in Brasilia, with the Federal Supreme Court and with a PB support, which is the coordinating network for Brazil's indigenous people. They are trained legally to undertake this action, and as indigenous leaders we run the risk of threats, not from the miners, but rather from the businessmen in the city. Businessmen who get rich, who have a lot of money. Our reports cause them a lot of damage. When we do this, aeroplanes are seized, helicopters are seized, and so are internet devices. When these are seized, they suffer. We, indigenous people, indigenous leaders who work to defend indigenous territory are threatened by miners. They can send someone to follow us, or they may co-opt or buy our young people who are lured into mining. Or our young people are not miners, they are being lured into doing something that in some ways they also need. We need the state to take action to defend the indigenous leaders who are working with this. We need the judiciary to resolve this situation, because it's not easy for us indigenous leaders to live in the city among the miners and to be followed constantly, to receive threatening phone calls,
porque no es fácil.
these kind of things. The state doesn't care about indigenous peoples at all. I mean, the Brazilian state isn't able to understand who indigenous peoples really are. At the moment, the Brazilian state thinks that indigenous peoples must integrate into non-indigenous societies, so they don't consider indigenous leaders to be indigenous leaders who need protecting. The state doesn't think like this. We are the ones who have to do the work. When we do this work within the Brazilian Human Rights Commission, sometimes it does start to have a small impact, because sometimes it reaches the UN. And the UN obliges Brazil to defend and to recognize rights and to protect those indigenous leaders. We've lost a lot of indigenous leaders with these murders. According to the information from the Indigenous Missionary Council, more leaders were murdered during this pandemic than during previous years. Our message is really our message to people in the United Kingdom as well as other European countries. Stop buying gold that is being sold and exported from Brazil, because this gold is not legal. Another issue is the contamination of our rivers where we used to bathe. And nowadays we can't bathe there any longer, because if I swim in the river, I get completely covered in mud. I can't eat the fish any longer because fish consume mercury, and if I eat fish, I am consuming mercury as well, and so on. This is a big problem, as well as the increase in illnesses. There's the issue of malaria, which is spreading so much that the state is unable to cope with it. The state could remove the illegal invaders, and if it could, it would also control malaria. There are the problems. These are the problems that we see. Another problem is the discourse of the President of Brazil, who wants to carry out and legalize gold mining in indigenous lands. This is an issue because we have indigenous relatives who support the government stance, which has always wanted us to tolerate the mining. This is very dangerous for us, so we have to be careful that this does not happen. Our struggle is to defend our territory so that our people can live well. This is our role here. Businessmen and companies do not care about people's lives. Their aim is to become richer and richer through this illegal sale of precious stones and other things. They don't pay any taxes because it's illegal. And so this network exists with other countries that also buy this gold easily.
So a society that wants to have jewelry, as a person who buys jewelry, you need to know where it comes from, because the gold extracted from Yanomami and Munduruku territories comes with indigenous blood, because indigenous people have sacrificed their lives. So it comes with indigenous blood. This is very worrying for us. The United Kingdom must pressure business people in the jewelry trade to know the origins of what is being sold. Because there are many large jewelry networks that want to do this, that want to make more money and get richer with this illegal exports from gold.
We now have an opportunity to participate in some international conferences. that the United Nations always convene. We also participate in the UN General Assembly, in the COPs, which are the UN climate talks, and also the UN Human Rights Council in Switzerland. We have this space. It's a historical victory for indigenous people. And so I hope that with this space, we can say that we exist. We exist. Indigenous people exist so that world leaders hear and listen to our voice. Today, neither the President nor any government representative can speak on behalf of indigenous peoples. We have to inhabit this space and tell world leaders that we exist, that we are the defenders, that we are a nation that defends against climate change. We keep the forest standing. The government won't be the one to do this. They aren't the ones doing this. The state needs to know and to listen to what indigenous people want. And together, we can develop a plan to confront climate change, combining non-indigenous knowledge, the science, with traditional knowledge, which comes from indigenous peoples.
Thanks very much to Mauricio. I just want to make a slight correction to the English translation, which because of shortage of time, it wasn't possible to correct for the video itself. He spoke about the general murders of Yanomami young people linked to the gold mining. And there was a mistake in the translation that this was the murders of 2 young people. It wasn't, it's the killings of many young people. But he also talked about 2 Yanomami children, and this was something which happened very recently, 2 young children who were killed by being sucked into the dredging machinery in the Parima River. And that was correctly translated. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our speakers from Latin America. And as you might have read in the chat beforehand, you can read more about the cases and the struggles of other human rights defenders in Latin America in CAFOD's report, Protecting Our Common Home. It's in the link on the chat. So now we're going to be taking some questions from the chat or other questions that you may have.
Yes. So just as Ariana has said, normally when a company goes into a territory, they promise people work. They said that they will use local people as labor to be able to contribute to the mine. But when these people decide to sell their land, what happened when they don't have professional training? They tell them that they either can't have work or they can have very bad work. And so yes, so people come to work in the mines and they have more professional levels of work. They come from other parts of Peru. They're not people from the communities. So the communities are tricked into selling their land in the promise of work, but then in the end, they're told that they don't have the proper training.
Over to you, Liam, for another question.
Yes, we've got another question here. And what we'll do, this is a question from Elizabeth. We're going to answer this question in 2 parts. We'll ask it of Karen, Ariana and Robinson about the context in their communities, but we'll also touch upon this in a presentation from our colleague Louise later about the context in the UK. And the question from Elizabeth is, what legal routes exist to sue the operators of mines? And Elizabeth says that she would have thought a few class action lawsuits against big corporates could draw a lot of attention to these wholly unacceptable practices that destroy environments and communities.
So for both Ariana and Karen, and also for Robinson, if you could tell us a little bit about what are the means that people have to defend themselves? What kind of actions can be taken legally to protect the communities? Who would like to answer that one first? Robinson,
¿Quién
perhaps?
quiere contestar primero? Robinson, quizás.
En el caso de Cajamarca,
Okay, so in Cajamarca, thankfully,
al no estar en desarrollo del proyecto minero, es decir, solamente estar en una fase de exploración.
So it's an exploration phase, and we were lucky to be able to use various mechanisms, legal mechanisms, and also political mechanisms. So there's a very important one.
En Colombia es denominada la.
There's an institution in Colombia called municipal people, so people who are in charge of defending human rights. So they're defending the human rights of the people within their municipalities. And in 2011, the person responsible for that started a popular action, which is a legal action to protect the rivers that were in areas of mining concessions. So we decided to give rights to these rivers and to suspend any mining activities in these areas unless the company can show that they can use a different source of water that isn't that of the rivers that have been protected. So this ruling was very important because apart from recognizing the risks of mining, it also puts quite a high standard for mining companies to actually continue with their operations. And so also there's another thing that still doesn't have a resolution and so we're using seed support to try to put an end to mining contracts in Cajamarca using after the popular consultation. It's been very difficult after this referendum. So it's been very difficult because the judges in the Republic understand that a mining contract in Colombia affects communities. It's not just a contract that is between the company and the state. It has wider implications that impact on the rights of the communities. And so we're on that path to have this resolution recognition and to actually be defended by the justice system. So what we've seen, and this is very important, is that not communities have used legal actions, and Anglo Gold, who's the owner of the La Colosa project, has used legal routes strategically to try to overwhelm it. So the environmental authority in Colombia, so if it says that they've been doing activities without the proper environmental licenses and they get a fine. And so then the company, what they do is sue the environmental authority that fined them. So they try to overcome and avoid their what they should do through that. So you need to respect environmental law, but then what they do is they actually sue the administrative institution that is fining them. So Anglo Gold uses the legal systems to continue with their projects in complete disdain for the law. And showing complete disdain for the Colombian law and also for the collective and environmental rights of the people and communities.
I'm sure that Karen and Ariana can also say quite a lot about the legal processes that they have been pursuing over many long years in Peru and in Espinar against the work of Glencore.
Muchas gracias.
Many thanks for the questions. Just to say, first of all, that that Peru is recognized internationally as a mining company. That means that we are recognized as being a country that promotes mining activities as central to its development model. And that raises alarm in terms of the rights of the communities. The rights of capital are more important than the rights of people. So that produces a great deal of difficulty for us because the legal system also accepts this model. So in the case of human rights violations, when there have been attacks against members of the communities during our protests, the problem is that the company has got agreements, has signed contracts with the police. So when we make complaints against the for abuses that have been committed, our complaints are against the police, but the legal system does not recognize the link with the companies, even though the police is paid by the companies. So this financial relationship between the companies and the police is a real problem. It means that we can't act against them when we have problems and when we're attacked and imprisoned. And the problem with the heavy metals, the state is inactive, does not respond, even though the companies are clearly violating the existing environmental protection laws, because they argue that they are fulfilling, that they are meeting the standards, even though they're not. And this is because they have a cozy relationship between the mining company and the state. So it's very hard to use the legal system in circumstances like that. However, despite that, we do have six administrative decisions where the state has imposed sanctions on the mining company. We have managed to achieve that they're not protecting the environment properly, that they're not respecting the rights of the workers, etc. So the company appeals against these decisions, and then that also clogs up, like in Colombia, that clogs up the judicial system because they counter sue. So it's very, very difficult to make progress with the legal system. And then there is another process that has not been followed in our territory. There was no free, prior and informed consultation process, which the company had to carry out to make sure that the indigenous population that lives in the area was happy with the scam. So we are fighting in order to ensure that this consultation is really taking place so that the voice and the opinions of the population are heard and can act against the implementation of the mine or the further implementation of the mine. Two further comments. Workers who work in the mine have complained publicly that during the pandemic, their houses have been that are their right as part of their contract have been taken away from them. But this case has disappeared. The documentation has disappeared during the pandemic period. There have also been arbitrary dismissals of workers, even though there are collective bargaining agreements that mean that the company is not able to summarily dismiss workers. And then finally, the topic of environmental reparations or for all of the damage that has been caused. There is a reparations plan and we're trying to make sure that it gets implemented, but this is something which the Peruvians as a whole will have to pay, because the money will come from the Peruvian state, and the money is enormous that would be required to rectify the damage caused. And rather than being serious about trying to limit or rectify the environmental damage, the state invests its money on criminalizing us and on putting obstacles in the wake of our human rights, and ensuring that the legal system doesn't work properly. But there are also actions. We've taken actions against the headquarters of the mining company. We've worked with the United Nations and with the Inter-American system in order to try and work with them as allies against the impositions of the company. Thank you very much for that very interesting response, Karim, and for the difficulties that you have.
International course and international organizations to support your cause. There are a few extra questions there, Liam. I think there's one that might be a good one for CISA to respond to on behalf of Mauricio. And that's the one which is from Dominic, saying that President Bolsonaro is trying to relax laws for the protection of indigenous peoples. And the question is, CISA, have the changes to these laws taken place yet? Or are they still going through the Brazilian courts and parliament?
Thank you, Claire. Thanks everyone that is with us tonight. And thanks, Dominic. Unfortunately, you are totally right. Bolsonaro's agenda is against the indigenous rights enshrined in the Brazilian Constitution, as well as getting rid of all the environmental legislation that could protect the environment and the indigenous land as well. So what the government is proposing changes the constitution, for example, in terms of mining, because the Brazilian constitution, as it is, ban mining on indigenous land on conservation areas. And Bolsonaro is trying, with many bills proposed by his party and allies, to change the constitution. We have a set of bills in the Congress, as you have mentioned, one that could allow mining, one that could reduce the size of conservation area, one that is really damaging, that is about almost destroying the environmental licensing legislation as it is. And for example, today, Congress has approved the legislation change. The size of deforestation you can do on a riverbank, because the legislation in Brazil was protecting the riverbank. So you have some, depending on the size of the river, we have some amount of meters or foot that you need to protect. And what the government did today was transfer the power to decide how much you can devastate to local government. So it's a total sell-off, it's a total destruction of what exists that is protecting both indigenous land and environmental conservation areas. So, and we also have in the Supreme Court case like the time limit tick that is trying to change the legislation, trying to set up what is going ahead. If Brazil is going to carry on demarcating the lands and the many lands that indigenous communities have been requesting, or they will use that the people that were not in their lands, but when the constitution was promulgated, they will not have rights to be the land. But we do know that when the Constitution of Brazil was validated, many indigenous people were evicted from the areas, and they have been claiming those lands for decades. So if the time limit tick is approved by the Supreme Court, it means that many, like more than 100 indigenous groups will not have land. And even groups that have their land demarcated in very small portion that are claiming more land, they have proof, anthropological proof, they have used this, or the territories, they will not get it. So it is really appalling. Myself as a Brazilian, I feel deeply ashamed because it's a relentless attack on the indigenous people's rights, on human rights, And at the end of the day, the rights of all of us, because it happens that the Amazon rainforest, a part of it is in Brazil, but this is for all of us. Like, this is not for only for Brazilians. This is, that forest helps to regulate the weather in the planet. So it doesn't belong to Brazilians. So it's really shameful. And I think when Louise will shortly talk, she can tell what we can do, because I think here in the UK, we can do a lot, because only international pressure, a lot of international pressure will change this. Bolsonaro has one more year of government. Next year is election in Brazil. He can he can destruct more, he can devastate more if you don't act quickly. So thank you for your question, and thank you everyone that is here listening some sad stories, but I hope we will just feel motivated to act. Thank you.
Thanks, Cisa, for that. And thanks to Robinson, to Karim, and to Ariana for their amazing contributions this evening. I would just say also, there is another question that's in the chat, but we can pass that over to, I think, Louise, who is going to talk to us now. That's the question from Terry, which is about how young people in Britain can work with the communities in Peru to protect their lands. So let's move over now to the campaign. We're going to restart recording this part. And I just want to introduce Louise, who will say what it is that we can do to support these communities in their urgent need to protect their human rights and to protect the people who are defending human rights and ensure access to justice. So we'll now hear from Louise Eldridge. Louise is CAFOD's private sector analyst in our policy team, and she's going to share with you just what we can do from the UK to ensure that we can hold companies to account for their failure to prevent human rights and environmental abuses wherever in the world they may be operating. So please, if you can, please stay connected so you can hear what it is that we can do here and what you can do in support of CAFOD's new campaign action to support human rights defenders. So over to you, Louise, please.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm going to start by saying that we will be hearing exactly what you can do straight after my presentation from my campaign colleagues will be taking you through that. So I'm just going to start by saying, of course, we know the private sector has a role in creating jobs and economic activity. But in this session, I'm going to talk more about the negative side, because when it comes to protecting our common home, there are business practices that need to be drastically reduced and need to stop. So I'm just going to do a short presentation and then we'll hear from campaign colleagues and then we will take questions. So next slide, please. So Pope Francis has said that the business can be a noble vocation, but he's also spoken out very firmly against a new version of colonialism with international companies benefiting off the back of the exploitation of natural resources and labour as well in the global south. So this is about global inequality and it's about a global imbalance of power. And CAFOD takes inspiration from Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which is all around the interconnection of the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, and an ecological conversion, which is what CAFOD are calling for, is about a transformation of how we live and act, not just as individuals, but as a community. And this, we think, includes being citizens in the world and includes advocating for stronger government action to protect our common home. Next slide, please. So we know that around the world, communities who work with CAFOD are experiencing the impacts of climate change, human rights abuse, and environmental destruction. And it's sometimes linked to the activities of UK companies and other multinational companies. And these abuses often happen for the production of goods and services as well, used and sold by businesses in the UK, and that might include beef, palm oil, timber, gold, energy, and other minerals. And companies are still actually sourcing from Brazil, despite the relentless attacks on indigenous people's rights and deforestation, as we just heard from Huisa about that. And companies are still sourcing from various countries that we've heard about today. So CAFOD works with partners around the world. You've heard about some of their stories already, and you might be familiar with some of the other big scandals around the activities of business, and you can see some of them on your screen today. One quite prominent one was the Rana Plaza disaster in 2013, and over 1,000 people died when an unsafe factory collapsed in Bangladesh, and clothes were being sold by UK brands like Primark, who make profits by paying very small amounts for the clothes that they sell on UK high street. So we're all connected to this in some way. So next slide, please. So here, a very simplified version of a supply chain and some of the actors involved in the process. And along the line, there are risks for farmers and workers who source, grow and make products, and for the communities who live around business operations, and for the environment and our common home. So you have companies that are hiding behind their global supply chains, which are often very, very lengthy and complex, and they're evading responsibility for the goods that they're purchasing. Other companies might be the direct owner of a subsidiary in another country, sorry. And then we also have banks and other investors who might provide investment that allows these activities to occur. And they're also profiting from violations that are out of sight. So we're saying that they are all complicit in different ways. And this is institutionalized because it's embedded in global business practice. And the biggest companies often have the most power to do something about this. So next slide, please. So current laws aren't enough at the moment to stop this, and it's often very difficult for those harmed to get justice for what they suffer. So there was a question earlier about lawsuits, and well, it's very, very challenging to take multinational companies to court in the UK, and it's even harder to actually get remedy from those cases. They can drag on for a number of years. There are a number of barriers that make it very, very challenging. And as Robinson mentioned earlier, there are often legal protections for companies that actually aren't for the people impacted by them. And CAFOD campaigned for the transparency in supply chains provision of the Modern Slavery Act. I mean, some of you, if you're a nerd, you might have heard of this. It was introduced in 2015, and it was a bit of a breakthrough in terms of changing the debate around the responsibility of businesses. But it's quite limited because it only requires businesses to report on what they've done to tackle modern slavery. It doesn't actually require them to take action. And it's obviously limited to modern slavery and not other abuses. So UK company Boohoo, for example, they failed to do anything to tackle the abusive working conditions in their supply chain, but actually the company was fully compliant with the Modern Slavery Act as it had produced a modern slavery statement. And also we've got a lot of voluntary measures to address companies' social and environmental impacts. So there's a big focus on corporate social responsibility and voluntary measures, but government has really relied far too much on this alone. And when measures are only voluntary, then responsible businesses who want to do the right thing can really be undercut by others. So this is not enough at the moment. So next slide, please. So we've just heard about the climate conference, global climate conference happening in Glasgow, and COP is now over, and it's time to double down on our efforts to protect our common home and turn our attention to some of the other global players whose actions are crucial in tackling the climate crisis and global poverty. And we need to make sure the government prevents negative business impacts on climate and the environment and human rights, which are all interlinked. And we've had some progress from the government on deforestation, tackling deforestation, but it really needs to go further. So we're calling for a new law applying to all businesses operating in the UK. It would mean companies have to prevent human rights and environmental abuse in the first place through conducting due diligence, which means assessing and acting on the risks to people and planet. It doesn't matter where in the world they operate, businesses would have to make absolutely sure they're putting people's lives and our common home at risk and be held accountable if they are. And if they fail to prevent harm, then those harmed could access justice in a UK court. So CAFOD are part of a coalition of NGOs and trade unions campaigning for this new law. And there are also campaigns in other countries for similar pieces of legislation. And we've had a few pieces of similar legislation go through. And there are MPs and businesses in the UK who have come out in support of this, but we're actually still a very long way from this becoming reality. So we really need your help. And we know this law won't fix everything, but it's a really important first step. And there are lots of other things we can do, like massively reducing global demand for these resources. So I'm now going to pass on to Liam to explain what you can do to help us.
Thanks very much, Louise. So as you know, as we've been hearing, we've heard the inspiring stories from our partners. We've heard from Robinson, from Ariana, from Karen and Mauricio. We've seen the need for companies to be held accountable when they commit or when in their supply chains, when environmental abuses and violations of human rights have been committed. So we have the opportunity to stand in solidarity with our partners, and we can do that quite simply tonight by going to our website and sending an email to your MP. You can do so by clicking on the link that I'm just about to put in the Zoom chat there. So please, everybody, go to that link and send an email to your MP. And this is so that we can ask our MPs to support the new law that Louise has been talking about. And that would mean that companies would be responsible for abuses that took place in their supply chains. And it means that the communities who are affected, they can seek access to justice. They can have that remedy for those violations. So please do go to the link in the Zoom chat and send an email to your MPs. Kate, can we move to the next slide, please? Because you can see here, when you've sent your email to that, will have a page which says thank you for doing so, and on there you've got 4 buttons. You've got the social media buttons: Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp and LinkedIn. And this means that you can very easily share this campaign with your friends and family. So if you click on one of those buttons in WhatsApp or send a tweet, Facebook, you'll get an automated post, so you don't even have to think about what you send to people. It's just really, really important to get as many people as possible to send a message to friends and family, to their MPs. If you want to know how to do so after this, you can go to cafod.org.uk/new law. But for the time being, please click on the link in the Zoom chat. And then just one more slide here. We're hoping to continue our campaigning on this issue and everything else that we're doing to fight for justice around the world and to reclaim our common home in the new year. If you don't already receive information about our campaigns and about our emails and about CAFOD's work, please do go to cafod.org.uk/action news and sign up for our emails. So I'll put the link to that in the chat as well, but please do send an email to your MP tonight using the link that we've already got there in the Zoom chat. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to you now, to Claire. And what we can do is, as before, if we've got any questions that you'd like to ask Louise about the proposed new law, then please do type them in the chat, and we'll try and answer those questions now. I'm going to, in the meantime, just send a link to the email sign up, but please do write some questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Thanks, Liam. We've got one from Helen, which is about the way the global economy currently works seems to be making unethical business practices very profitable. So it's hard to trust big companies to make the right decisions. Now, here's a question for you, Louise. Are there any companies that you would recommend to socially and environmentally conscious consumers in the UK? Who should we be buying our things from? Who should we be sourcing them from?
So it's tricky to answer, because I think, there certainly are companies that are better than others, and there are obviously sites like Ethical Consumer that will allow you to differentiate a little bit between those companies that are really doing a lot better on these sort of issues. But I think the reason why we're campaigning for a new piece of legislation and not necessarily sort of picking out any names of companies, apart from those that we do mention in our case studies, we're really just encouraging people to focus on the fact that these violations and abuses are quite widespread and almost endemic across supply chains in all sectors, in all areas. So that's why we're focusing on a piece of legislation that will bring up the standards for all companies. So definitely go out and do your research, try and buy ethically. There are definitely companies that are better than others. I'm not going to I won't name any at the moment, but yeah, I get your point, and I think we should all be taking all of the actions that we can, whether that's as consumers or as citizens, calling for better regulation.
Thanks, Louise. And Terry's just reminded us to go back to his question earlier about just how we can get young people involved in defending the rights of the communities to justice. How do we work with young people to mobilize them on behalf of the people of the Global South?
I think that's a question I'd love my campaign colleagues to answer. So possibly Liam or Andrea, if you could answer that question, how are we going to mobilize young people in the UK to take action?
I can take this one. Well, it's responsibility of everyone trying to mobilize young people. And one of the, in my experience, young people want to do things, want to do practical things. So encourage every young people that in your family, in your colleagues, and especially if you're a young person, you need to ensure that we take responsibility to inspiring each other. And this new legislation, if we manage to introduce this new legislation, will have a huge positive impact all around the world. So I think that I would encourage you to do is share the stories that we share today. Tell why it's important to do this, why it's important that for wherever we are, we can do something. And empower each other and take responsibility of the role that we have to improve society. And very simple things is pass on and share on social media and with everyone this call of action, which is the beginning of a legislation that can literally change and improve the life of people all around the world and communities.
Thanks, Andrea. And Phil is asking, and this is again to you, Louise, now, how effective can we be, or can anyone be, by purchasing a share in the mining companies and being a vocal shareholder? How effective can that kind of challenge be?
Well, that can be a challenge. But I also, there are lots of different things we can do. We can also divest and take our money out of these companies. So there are organisations like Share Action who do encourage sort of shareholder action and raise questions at AGMs, and that can be a way to engage companies. But it also means that you're speaking to the company in the room, and actually we need to go a bit broader and bigger with this, I think. And we need to, there are also organizations like London Mining Network that do a lot of campaigning outside AGMs and raising awareness that way. And I think we need to build public pressure from the outside as well, and that's what we're doing here. And I think so shareholder resolutions can have some limited impact, but I think that we actually have a bigger impact if we're campaigning and raising awareness from the outside as well. I know that there was one other question that I just wanted to quickly go to about ESG investors that was a bit earlier up in the chat. Just to quickly touch on that, there is rapidly rising scrutiny on sort of ethical investment. Again, I would just go back to saying that we need to make this, we need to put this into law to make this something that all companies and investors actually are required to do. And just going back to the question on shareholders, I don't know if any of our partners, possibly Kareem, wanted to come in on this, because I know some of our partners also have some engagement in this issue. So any of the partners from Peru wanted to add anything on that?
I wonder, Karen, did you get that question? Is Karen still with us?
Sí, sigo por aquí.
Do you want to repeat the question, Louise, about the?
Yeah. So the question is, how effective can you be purchasing a share in the mining companies and being a vocal shareholder, challenging misleading PR regarding their ethics and human rights violations?
Well, our experience suggests from Human Rights Without Borders, we have worked with other countries such as Colombia, Chile, and others, where what we have done is, first of all, produce a report, a shared report between finding the common patterns of abuses that characterize Glencore's activities across different countries. And then with an allied organization in Switzerland, we were able to participate in the general meeting of Glencore, where this report about the impacts of Glencore's activities in different countries was presented to shareholders. And it was the first time that many shareholders had heard about what their company is doing. And apparently not everybody, not all the shareholders were aware of the kind of activities that Glencore carries out, because a lot of the reports that Glencore and its subsidiaries produce, they just show the nice stuff, the pretty pictures, and where they say that they are developing social programs. But what this shadow report did, what we produced, was show the other side, the other part of the story, that many times of the communities that many times don't have a voice in the shareholders meetings. And what happened as a result of that was that shareholders asked for a meeting, asked us to attend a meeting, or asked communities to attend a meeting. We haven't heard more since this meeting, but we are hoping that we will. Another thing that happened was with the change of the CEO of Glencore, who basically handed over to one of his protected proteges. And so we have also worked with MultiWatch, this organization in Switzerland. We have sent the new CEO a letter describing what is going on in the name of Glencore in Africa and other countries where it operates. Our principal demand of him was to ask that the management group of Glencore took seriously the human rights abuses that were occurring as a result of its mining activity, and that they should listen to the voices of the communities in order to be a responsible multinational company. So we sent this letter and we requested a meeting with him, but we haven't been successful. So these are two advocacy activities that we have produced, that we have carried out. It's not so difficult, I would say. I don't think it is very, very difficult to do these kind of activities. It is possible to reach some shareholders, and if you've got an ally like MultiWatch, then I think that this is a feasible way to work. We didn't have very long to speak. They only really gave us a minute to speak because the other minute had to be for the interpretation. So it's not that we were able to speak in any detail about our situation, but we did produce the report and hand it in. This is what we did from Human Rights Without Frontiers. So we got another question from Elizabeth. I don't know if maybe Andrea could respond to this, which is a question of how CAFOD works with other organizations, like, for instance, Climate Action or other institutions, the bodies that are focused on these same issues. How do we work with them? Who do we work in coalition with on these matters?
Lian, do you want to take this one?
Yes, Elizabeth, we work with lots of different groups, across many campaigns, whether it's climate change, whether it's business and human rights, whether it's fair trade. A lot of faith groups, the likes of Christian Aid, TFund, World Vision. Specifically on climate, we work as part of, as a key member of the Climate Coalition, which is a group of more than, I think now 130, might even be 150 organizations, and that's representing millions of people from around the country. And the great strength about that in particular is it's such a wide coalition. You have the likes of student unions, trade unions in one part, faith groups such as CAFOD and Christian Aid in another, and other development groups such as Oxfam and Save the Children. But then you also have organizations which might focus more on nature, for example, such as the National Trust, the RSPB, the Woodland Trust. Specifically on business and human rights, we're working as part of what is known as the Corporate Justice Coalition. And Louise, I wonder if I can pass over to you, because you have a very strong relationship with the Corporate Justice Coalition, don't you?
Yeah, so we work in a coalition that includes green groups, faith groups, those who have more technical expertise on sort of legal issues around corporate accountability, and other NGOs. So it's very broad, and also trade unions as well, because they're very much involved as a focus on workers' rights in supply chains. So we love to work in coalitions. We love to work with the organizations, and recently we also worked with Global Witness, for instance, to facilitate one of the human rights defenders that we had visiting us, Claude Elisa from Brazil, to visit an MP in Parliament and to speak to them about what she was facing. So, and that was with regard to raising the awareness about the issue of investors in the UK contributing to deforestation in Brazil. So there are many different organisations we work with, and it's great to work with them in coalition. And I think Andrea wanted to speak as well.
Yeah, adding to that, we work a lot of coalitions, as my colleague says, and it's incredibly important because it's stressing our work and give legitimacy. But we need to acknowledge also that what the people that politicians really listen is to us as citizens. You know, our MPs are interested in listen to us because they are interested in keeping our seats in Parliament, and some of them are quite influential, probably. So once again, let's be aware of the power of our voice and email our MP and spread the need to push for this legislation to everyone that you know.
Thanks, Andrea. Phil has told us something about a group of nuns who have been very effective in challenging Elon Musk. I think I missed that story, but any more questions there in the chat, or anybody want to raise their hands and ask another question?
I wonder, Claire, if I could just quickly speak to that, the kind of metal use for cars, because I think it is an interesting issue that has come up much more recently about things like metals that are being used for electric cars and for the green transition, and that they're still being linked with human rights abuses in mines, for instance, in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and other countries. So real important message from CAFOD is that human rights, environment and climate are all very linked and dependent on one another, and we can't move, we can't combat climate change without listening to those people who are on the front lines affected by climate and are protecting their forests, the communities that we've heard from today. And we must make sure that with the move to greener energy, that we're not sacrificing the poor around the world for that transition, that what we are doing is moving to a greener but also a more just economy, where we listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor together. So that's just a message I want everyone to take away as well.
Thanks, Louise. No more questions for the time being, but we do have a few reminders in the chat there from Liam. One thing that you can do tonight or tomorrow morning, remember to email your MP to take the CAFOD action, and also to sign up for all of the other campaign asks that CAFOD is preparing on this particular campaign. Oh, thank you, Phil, for putting the note in the chat about Panorama. I'm sure that'll be an interesting thing for people to be looking at. Do we have any more questions?
I don't think we've got any more questions now, but if you do have any further questions that come to you later tonight or in the weeks and months to come as we're continuing this campaign, then please do get in touch with us. You can do that at cafod@cafod.org.uk. So it'd be great to hear from you then. But please do take send an email to your MP using the link that we've put in the chat multiple times. There's no excuses now. You've got the link at hand. Please encourage family and friends, and people in your parishes as well. It's really important that we get as many letters to MPs as possible in their inboxes, and they feel the pressure and they're sure that this is something we demand. This is what we were saying, with the question of coalitions. We weren't just reading a class list of all the people that we work with. The purpose of that is to say that change comes about when there's a critical mass of people demanding it. And when it's seen as, when decision makers see that those people come from across society, that is the strength of us working in coalition. And that's something we are doing, particularly with this campaign as well, as Louise has been saying, we're working with friends in other organisations. But 1, please send that email to your MPs. 2, share it with your friends and family. And 3, sign up to hear more about the campaign and about CAFOD's work in the weeks and months to come. I'll hand back to you, Claire.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. Very important message, because whilst we still have the vestiges, at least, of a democracy in this country, sometimes we can wonder whether that's really the case. We can do things that can help massively our friends, our colleagues, our partners, and the communities of the global south. We need to make our democracy work so that they can make their democracies work. And that's really at the heart of so much of our work. So it's been great to have had you with us this evening, Friday evening, when so many people have got lots of things to do, preparing for the weekend, but great that you've been sticking with us, and it's fantastic. I'd like to thank you all for turning up and for sticking with us, for asking such amazing questions, and to thank particularly all our panelists, the defenders, all of you from Peru, from Colombia, from Brazil. You have just been a great inspiration to us. Thank you so much for the work that you do every day, facing dangers, facing threats, to defend our common home as the Pope Francis is asking us to do. So thanks for all of you for what you've done today. As Liam has reminded you, please join our online actions calling for the government and businesses to protect land and environmental defenders. They're risking their lives to defend our home, and so we can do something to support them. So I urge you all to join our campaign action, and thanks again. We might get a little bit despondent about our own capacity to influence our politicians, but we certainly have a voice and we can certainly use it. Thanks all. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. And don't forget to write to your MPs.
The camera's on to say goodbye.